Well, I mean, the war, Turkey. And it's hard to find an entirely virtuous side to take, and I'm I think there's a certain fraction of the anti-imperialist left which maintains a sort of rather beguiled fondness for Assad, which is willing to paint him as a blameless victim of imperialist slander and propaganda. A CIA operative, to quote him. To decry American imperialism, one hardly needs to defend Assad. So there are a few areas that are worth discussing. I think it's one lens through which I want to do this is the Kurdish question, the history of the Kurds in the region, the relationship of organisations like the PKK, which is the Kurdish Workers' Party, the Kurdish nation state, and that I think is intensely important. But yeah, I mean whether. Yeah, I want to hand over to you because I know you want to talk about the Islamic State.
The Islamic State, right? Right. Louis XIV or Charles I. I don't think there's much scholarship about this at the moment within a lot of the intellectual output of ISIL at the moment. I think. All of that seems really difficult. I mean, to me, it looks like Afghanistan, right? Afghanistan between 1980, the beginning of the Soviet invasion, and then I think 2004. And then all the way till now, it's just smashed to bits. The geography of the country changes. America. But the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency has said, it's a bit like John Locke. John Locke. So, James, we've got half an hour left. It feels like we've covered too much. Very bitty. We're talking about Kurdistan, statehood, Islam, the past, the future. Let's try and tie some really key concepts down. Go on.
Okay, look, the reason I'm talking about Kurdistan is that the way that there are transformations in the question of how you form a nation state it reflects as much on what is happening with Islamic State as it does as it does within the sort of Kurdish canton itself.
Do you think these are two sides of the same coin, really?
I think they are two expressions of a degrading world order.
Yeah.
And I think that, in fact, I hold no flag for Assad at all. I also don't think, but to the outbreak of civil war. So that I think is important. But even with a sort of layman's grasp of the situation in the Middle East, here I think it's important to look. I think it is probably necessary at this point to talk a little bit about another way into this question, which is the Kurdish question, but to think about the contemporary turn of the Kurdish Workers' Party and its sort of exercises in Syria at the moment, one has to go, I think, right the way back to the formation of the states of the region, and that is really, beginning of the 20th century. The borders we have today are largely a function of division of the Ottoman Empire at the hands of France and Britain, who are victorious over it, and the current division between the current borders between Iraq and Syria are largely a consequence of their division into mandates. And so here you have the creation of nation states within the Middle East. Again, there are sort of domestic state politics involved in the Kurdish question, but I think perhaps one of the things to say here is it is of course an important matter in the Middle East. In fact, and the reason I come at this through the Kurdish question is partly because, there is actually provision made, I think, in 1920 for the existence of a Kurdistan. Maybe it's important to say that the Kurds are the Kurdish population is large, and it is split between Turkey, Syria, Iraq, and Iran, independent Kurdistan. Tribal leaders and landowners, Kurdish landowners, the region occupied by the Kurdish population. Now, they sort of crush sort of Kurdish uprisings, and a series of nationalist riots sort of characterize the early period of Kurdish nationalism. And then you have what we could call a Kurdish movement, Kurdish national movement. A series of sort of, there's actually a significant sort of Iranian purge of Kurds as well.
Absolutely. People talk about, Iran has a number of human rights failings because, they really do not tolerate this stuff, right? The agency, right?
Look, I'm finding it difficult here because
Here's a question: how different is it actually then to what's going on in North Syria with Kurdistan?
That neoliberal global order only prolongs American hegemony so long, actually, and we sort of enter into a series of possible world orders, either a global empire run by the West, or a world market society largely sort of very heavily sort of oriented towards the East. And now, look, it doesn't actually, I don't think, look like a full-throated global Western-run empire is functional. I don't, it's not really happening. A series of sort of long-term chaotic developments arising out of struggles between a kind of somewhat diminished capitalism and sort of agencies of opposition that are kind of dispersed, like the Islamic State. Yes, possibly.
Okay, here's a question. What do you think the US wants now in the Middle East? What's its end game? How does that align with Al-Qaeda and ISIL?
Well, now that, I think, is that comes back to that means we have to address the question of the Syrian civil war more specifically, yeah. I think, and what actually the American interest here is. So yes, some of the US fears for the region is a kind of a state actor that is capable of opposing its sort of its ability to operate freely. And it would be much easier to have kind of dispersed and incompatible theological political regimes than something like the Syrian nation state, which does combine, or did combine, various religious minorities and relatively secular, explicitly secular regime, but But the thing, I mean, I suppose the thing to say here, or the thing that I think is important to remember, and the thing that becomes clear to me from speaking with Syrian refugees, for instance, perhaps something that is worth us concentrating on, because often it can feel sort of as if there isn't anything that anyone can do here. But look, there is the case for bombing here is there is a humanitarian crisis. Something needs to be done. There's something that we can do is bomb people, so therefore we must bomb people. This is essentially the logical argument. So yes, the thing I think we should say is that to insist that Assad must go before a settlement is reached, or movement towards a settlement is reached.
So not American imperialism, not Assad, but international socialism. You're not saying that. We've got to be a bit more.
Well, I mean, I think that probably actually is my political position,
right?
But I also don't think that look, I'm not in the business of making American foreign policy, and I think I'm not going to pretend to be.
This is something we've got to suss out, because right now, we've got to arm the curse of the teeth. Long live the YPG. But other than that, there are far more questions than there are answers right now from the left when it comes to Syria and how we can achieve something meaningful, peaceful, sustainable, just for our brothers and sisters elsewhere in the Middle East. Right. Well, James, thank you as ever. My name's Aaron Bastani. This is Fire FM. See you same time, same place next week. Bye.